Welcome back, dear friends, to the Crimson Academy's course on a tribute to His Holiness Abdu'l-Baha. Dear friends, we're picking back up on Hassan Baliuzi's immortal work, Abdu'l-Baha, the Center of the Covenant of Baha'u'llah. Dear friends, we are on Chapter 21, To Egypt and the Holy Land. Abdu'l-Baha had decided not to travel to the Holy Land immediately. Pilgrims assembled in Haifa were called by cable to come to Egypt. As the hotel in which they were to be housed proved too small for their numbers and activities, a huge tent of the type which Egyptians used for public functions was pitched on the roof of the hotel. There were constant gatherings under the shade of that tent. Meetings were held there at which Abdu'l-Baha oftentimes spoke. Soon after his arrival at Port Said, he remarked that at a time when the heat of the summer drove people to Paris, he had come away from Paris to Egypt. He recalled that in the days of Baha'u'llah, cholera broke out 4 times in the Holy Land. It touched the environs of Akka and reached the Lebanon, but within Akka there was no cholera. Immediately after the ascension of Baha'u'llah, there was another outbreak of the epidemic, this time inside the city walls. Abdu'l-Baha, feeling that he could not stay at Bahji and leave the Baha'is of Akka to themselves, returned to the city, only to find that other people had fled Akka and put their homes in the care of the Baha'is. He appointed watchmen to guard these houses. All the Baha'is escaped the ravages of the epidemic. Then cholera died down in the city, but appeared in the neighborhood, at which the people who had abandoned their homes rushed back to Akka. Another day, under the tent, Abdu'l-Baha, looking at the ranks assembled, said it was truly remarkable that such a gathering had been made possible. The issue of the Egyptian Gazette for Friday, June 27th, carried an article under the headlines, Abdu'l-Baha in Egypt, Wonderful Scenes in Port Said, Eastern Baha'is Assembled in Force. Abdu'l-Baha was now kept more occupied than ever. There were so many pilgrims, so many Baha'is of Egypt to meet and converse with, and a great many letters to answer. Letters, petitions, and cables came pouring in from the east and the west. All the tablets belonging to this period are in his own handwriting. And there were not only Baha'is to meet. On June 24th he had written and spoken much. At the end of the day, greatly fatigued, he was on the point of leaving the house for his daily walk when a group of Christian missionaries, men and women, appeared at his door and asked to meet him. Abdu'l-Baha received them with his usual courtesy and kindness. Before long, they were harshly criticizing the Muslims and Islam. Abdu'l-Baha told them that what they were talking about was not the true Islam, but imitations and trivialities. And he reminded them of a verse in the Quran about Christ. Those who have believed, the Jews, the Christians, and the Sabaeans, who believe in God and the Day of Judgment, and do righteously, have their reward with their Lord. Neither is there fear for them, nor are they to grieve. One of the missionaries said that in the Gospels Christ is extolled as the Son of God, the highest possible station, whereas in the Quran, no such reference is made to Jesus. To this, Abdu'l-Baha replied that the term Son of God was current in the days of Moses, and Jesus was applied to the whole of Israel. He referred them to Exodus, chapter 4, verses 22 to 23. And thou shalt say unto Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. And I say unto thee, Let my son go, that he may serve me. And if thou refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay thy son, even thy firstborn. Cares of many kinds occupied the mind of Abdu'l-Baha at this period, and his fever kept recurring. But his sense of humor never deserted him. One day he asked Hussein Ruhi how many pupils there were in his school. 160, he replied. Abdu'l-Baha commented that Ruhi must certainly be both busy and rich, for he had 160 students. But Abdu'l-Baha had not a single one. Could Hussein Ruhi find him some? Mirza Jafar Rahmaniya Shirazi, Hadiyaf, invited all the Baha'is in Port Said to dinner. There were more than 70 of them. They ate under the tent, and Abdu'l-Baha served the food, and then gave them all sweets. The next day, June 28th, most of the pilgrims who had come over from Haifa departed. At this time, Abdu'l-Baha was disturbed by the news of Mirza Abu Fazl's continued illness. He sent Mirza Muhsin Afnan, his son-in-law, and then Sayyid Jalal, the son of the Baha'i poet Sina, to Alexandria to see that Mirza Abu Fazl lacked nothing. Among Abdu'l-Baha's ever-increasing mail, a number of letters arrived one day from Istanbul. They were from some of the notables written in Turkish, and they brought joy to Abdu'l-Baha. He said he would go to Istanbul and raise the call of Baha'u'llah, but for the dire consequences which would ensure in the Holy Land. Many would turn to the faith, the wrath of the fanatics would be aroused, and they would assail the shrines. Sayyid Asadullah, who had served Abdu'l-Baha in America and Europe, and was now 76 years old, set out on July 10th for the Caucasus, after asking Abdu'l-Baha to be allowed to go and teach the faith there. The next day, because of adverse weather in Port Said, Abdu'l-Baha left for Ismailiyah. He took Mirza Munir and Agha Khusra with him. A few Baha'is whom Abdu'l-Baha summoned to Ismailiyah a week later found him sitting up in bed in the hotel of J. Basta with high fever and weaker than he had been. In that state, he was attending to his mail. Ismailiyah was less humid, but Abdu'l-Baha's feverish condition became worse. It was thought that Ramla, a suburb of Alexandria, might prove more salubrious. So, on July 17th, Abdu'l-Baha traveled to Alexandria. After a stay of 2 weeks in the Hotel Victoria at Ramla, he moved to a house which he rented in the vicinity of Mazlum Pasha Station. He also rented a second house for his secretaries and others who would be coming to visit him. A third house was secured nearby for Mirza Abul Fazayel. Lua Getzinger arrived at Port Said on July 23rd, and Edward Getzinger soon after. Lua was not to see her native land again. Isabel Fraser came at a later date, summoned by Abdu'l-Baha for a mission. He wished to entrust to her. There were other Western Baha'is in Egypt, such as Mrs. Stannard, an English lady who, in future years, established the Baha'i Bureau in Geneva, and Dr. Joseph de Bons, a French dental surgeon who practiced in Cairo, and Madame de Bons, Edith Mackay, first to accept the faith from May Maxwell in Paris. One morning, around 6 o'clock, Abdu'l-Baha went to the house where his secretaries lived, to find most of the residents still asleep. He himself had already attended to his correspondence and other matters, and had written several tablets. The air of Ramla suited him, and his health improved. Individual Baha'is, and particularly the Baha'is of the East, wrote to him on every conceivable subject. One would ask his advice about purchasing a piece of land. Another would request a name for a child newly born. One would ask him whether to marry, another whether to make a certain journey. He always had misunderstandings to resolve, feelings to soothe. Baha'i groups, communities, and spiritual assemblies, as more of them came into being, also took more and more of his time for counsel, advice, and guidance. His correspondence was not limited to the Baha'is. Many were the people, not his adherents, who wrote to him and had replies. Societies and congresses and conferences in the West were by now also writing to him. Soon after he reached Egypt, he received a letter through its secretary from the 6th International Congress of Free and Progressive Christians and other religious liberals meeting in Paris. Abdu'l-Baha's eldest grandson, Shoghi Effendi, his sister, the Greatest Holy Leaf, and his eldest daughter arrived from Haifa on August 1st. A Baha'i going to Abdu'l-Baha's house early one morning heard Shoghi Effendi chanting a prayer, and Abdu'l-Baha instructing him. Abbas Hilmi Pasha, the Khedive of Egypt, met Abdu'l-Baha for the third time on August 17th, and Prince Muhammad Ali, the brother of the Khedive, called on Abdu'l-Baha a month later. Osman Pasha Mortada, the Khedive's chamberlain, was devoted to Abdu'l-Baha and was the intermediary arranging meetings between him and Abbas Hilmi Pasha, Abbas II. A tablet which Abdu'l-Baha addressed to Osman Pasha in October 1919, 5 years after Abbas Hilmi was deposed, is indicative of the stature of the man. He is called Amir al-Wafa, the Prince of Fidelity. Among the visitors who sought to meet Abdu'l-Baha in Ramla were deputies of the Turkish Parliament and members of the academic staff of the Syrian Protestant College, the American University of Beirut. Baha'i students of the college who were spending their summer holidays on Mount Carmel also went to Ramla in 2 groups to attain the presence of Abdu'l-Baha. In the course of the summer months and early autumn, Abdu'l-Baha's health greatly improved, but as the year advanced, old symptoms returned. Fever and insomnia began, once again, to drain his physical strength. The attempts instigated by Tamaddun-ul-Mulk, who had been in London during Abdu'l-Baha's first visit, to divide the Baha'is in Tehran, and the increasingly erratic behavior of Dr. Aminullah Farid brought him much suffering and sorrow. He went for a few days to Abukir, but the change of scenery gave him no relief, and he decided to leave Egypt, especially since his family and the Baha'is of the Holy Land were begging him to return. He boarded a Lloyd Triestino boat on December 2nd. There were 2 stops at Port Said and Jaffa, and the Baha'is of these towns had the opportunity of being with Abdu'l-Baha for a short while. Early in the afternoon of December 5th, the boat cast anchor in the harbor of Haifa. Abdu'l-Baha sent his attendants ashore and told them not to let the Baha'is assemble at the landing stage. He himself disembarked at nightfall. Emujin Huag, who was in Haifa awaiting his arrival, wrote, "In Abdu'l-Baha's house there is a very large central room, around which are the other rooms, and in it Persian rugs were spread, and tables placed upon which were fruits and sweets." When Abdu'l-Baha's voice was heard as he entered, the moment was intense, and as he passed through to his room, all heads were bowed. In a few moments he returned to welcome all. He sat in a chair at one end of the room, and most of the believers sat on the floor. Abdu'l-Baha was tired, so remained but a short time, and after a prayer chanted by his daughter Ziya Khanum, the eldest daughter of Abdu'l-Baha, went to his room. Then the ladies vacated so that the men might enter. To see the faces of those sturdy, earnest men, faces that spoke the fervor of their faith, the earnestness and resoluteness of their purpose, was something to remember. I am sure not an eye was dry. Old and young, with happiness filling their hearts, could not refrain from exhibiting their emotion. He welcomed them, and seating himself on the floor, spoke to them a short time, after which he retired. The next morning, Abdu'l-Baha went up the mountain to the shrine of the Bab, the mausoleum which his indefatigable labors had raised with untold heartache. The Baha'is of the Holy Land and the pilgrims had already gathered there and lined the pathway which led to the shrine. Abdu'l-Baha beckoned to them to enter the eastern foreroom of the inner shrine. He, all alone, entered the western foreroom. The next day, they were his guests for luncheon at Akka, after which they went to Bahji and to the shrine of Baha'u'llah. But Abdu'l-Baha himself was not there. He had to be alone to put his forehead on the threshold of the room where the human temple of his father rested, and unburden his heart. In the late afternoon, Baha'is had foregathered in the railway station. Large numbers of the inhabitants of Akka had also come. Abdu'l-Baha was on the train from Haifa. By a vast assemblage, among them many of the notables of Akka and Haifa, he was escorted to the city which had held him captive for long years. The death of Mirza Abul Fazayel, which occurred in Cairo on January 21st, 1914, brought deep sorrow to Abdu'l-Baha. Speaking at his home the next day, he said, "No matter how much we want to console ourselves, we cannot be consoled. How good for man to be like this, so that the hearts of all the friends are attracted to him in every way. While in Alexandria, every time my heart was depressed, I used to go and meet him, and at once my depression vanished. He was very truthful. He never harbored deceit and revenge." Baha'i history has so far not recorded anyone equal to Mirza Abul Fazl in learning. Combined with that vast learning were rare detachment and humility. Isabel Fraser, who had seen him frequently at Ramla, wrote after his death, "With all his book learning, he was not at all bookish. The same dignity and impressiveness with which he discussed a verse of the Quran with the learned sheikhs, he put into the meeting of some sojourning American, often finishing with a personal pleasantry, for he was a ready humorist and made his guests instantly at ease. He had the placidness of a child and the air of one who was never in a hurry and had plenty of time to make radiantly happy the place where God had placed him. One day I was at his house. There were about 20 sheikhs who had come over from Alexandria to visit him. One who seemed to be the leader was a very learned and gorgeously attired young sheikh who said with some pride that he had been educated in the oldest university in the world. He was the editor of a magazine in Alexandria and had come to interview Mirza Abul Fazl, who for more than an hour had been listened with absorbed attention. His talk was interspersed with an occasional jest, and his sharp eye would glance from one face to another to see if his point was understood. Suddenly, Abdu'l-Baha appeared. Mirza Abul Fazl faced the door. The rest of us had our backs to it and did not see him. There was a moment of silence, and Mirza Abul Fazl stood with his head bowed. His whole attitude changed. He immediately became the most humble and respectful of servitors. Then quickly arranging a chair for Abdu'l-Baha, he told him in a low voice, in answer to his questions, the subject under discussion. In the first half of the year, 1914, pilgrims were continuously arriving at Abdu'l-Baha's door from both the east and the west, and he was also constantly receiving all manner of men. Dr. Howard Bliss, president of the Syrian Protestant College, visited him on February 15th. A group of tourists from England called on him on the 22nd. Another day, as he was dictating tablets, 2 Arabs who hated the sight of each other were announced at short intervals. Abdu'l-Baha told them stories to make them laugh. Then he said that his home was the home of peace and joy, laughter and exaltation. They should not go out of it with the feeling of enmity in their hearts. Leaving them for a while, he returned with sweets and 2 Persian silk handkerchiefs, one for each. These were to be the token of their pledge of friendship. They recognized that God had directed their steps to Abdu'l-Baha's home that morning, and went away from his presence, joyous and full of laughter. But Abdu'l-Baha was fatigued and weighed down with the cares of his stewardship, almost beyond endurance. It was in those months that he wrote this tablet. Friends, the time is coming when I shall be no longer with you. I have done all that could be done. I have served the cause of Baha'u'llah to the utmost of my ability. I have labored night and day all the years of my life. Oh, how I long to see the loved ones taking upon themselves the responsibilities of the cause. Now is the time to proclaim the kingdom of Baha. Now is the hour of love and union. This is the day of the spiritual harmony of the loved ones of God. All the resources of my physical strength I have exhausted, and the spirit of my life is the welcome tidings of the unity of the people of Baha. I am straining my ears toward the east and toward the west, toward the north and toward the south, that haply I may hear the songs of love and fellowship chanted in the meetings of the faithful. My days are numbered, and but for this there is no joy left unto me. Oh, how I yearn to see the friends united, even as a string of gleaming pearls, as the brilliant Pleiades, as the rays of the sun, as the gazelles of one meadow. The mystic nightingale is warbling for them all. Will they not listen? The bird of paradise is singing. Will they not heed? The angel of Abha is calling to them. Will they not hearken? The herald of the covenant is pleading. Will they not obey? Ah me, I am waiting to hear the joyful tidings that the believers are the very embodiment of sincerity and truthfulness, the incarnation of love and amity, the living symbols of unity and concord. Will they not gladden my heart? Will they not satisfy my yearning? Will they not manifest my wish? Will they not fulfill my heart's desire? Will they not give ear to my call? I am waiting. I am patiently waiting. Then came a time when Abdu'l-Baha would no longer permit pilgrims to come, and on June 29th, pilgrims present in the Holy Land were instructed to leave. This is the day of farewell, Abdu'l-Baha said, and the time of leave-taking is very hard. The Arabian poet says, "The days of my union with the beloved were so few that the greeting was the farewell. Indeed, I am deeply grieved, but I do not say goodbye to you, because there is a complete connection among the hearts and among the souls. There is unity and agreement. We never have a separation from one another. This nearness and remoteness concerns the world of bodies. In the world of spirits and souls there is union, never separation. The heart feels the union. The eye sees and carries the sight to the heart, which becomes affected. When the heart is engaged with the friends, there is no separation, especially if you go in service to the cause of God." Mirza Ali Akbar Nakhjavani and Mirza Mahmud Zarqani, the faithful attendants and companions of his tour of America and Europe, Abdu'l-Baha direct to the Caucasus and India respectively. Mrs. Emogene Huag was directed to Italy. Abdu'l-Baha knew that the storm which he had predicted was about to break over Europe and over the world. By the middle of the year, the defection of Dr. Farid had come into the open, and the Baha'is of the West had to be protected. Farid was traveling in Europe in defiance of Abdu'l-Baha, announcing his arrival beforehand so that meetings would be organized for him. In London, the Kingsway Hall had been booked, and the meeting was advertised. It was summertime, and Lady Blomfield was not in London. However, the timely intervention of Dr. Lutfullah Hakim prevented Farid from speaking. Some of the Baha'is were badly shaken by the incident, and a few fell away. Annie Gamble, at whose home the issue was decided and the community was saved, proved a rock of strength. George Latimer and Charles Mason Remy were also present at this time, having come from the United States to tour Europe at the bidding of Abdu'l-Baha. After a stay of 3 months in Paris, they had arrived in London and would later proceed to Holland and Germany. As late as the middle of July, Abdu'l-Baha instructed Dr. Habibullah Khuda Bakhsh, now Dr. Mu'ayyad, who had just completed his medical studies in the Syrian Protestant College, and Azizullah Bahadur, who was still a student, and both of whom were in Haifa, to go immediately to Europe to counter Farid's activities. They were in Stuttgart when the war broke out. Then Abdu'l-Baha recalled them to Haifa, and specified that George Latimer and Charles Mason Remy should accompany them. They reached Alexandria on September 28th and Haifa on October 5th. Laura and Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney set out for the United States. Mrs. Chevalier was active there as Dr. Farid's emissary. But Farid's efforts came to naught, as the effort of all who violated the covenant had come to naught. The prime cause of his downfall was his insatiable greed for money. At various times and under a variety of pretexts, he had tried to get money from Baha'is, particularly wealthy individuals in the United States, such as Mrs. Hearst and Mrs. Parsons. To some he had whispered that Abdu'l-Baha needed money, although, as they had noticed, he would not openly accept it from them. But if they would let him have it, he would see that Abdu'l-Baha received it in due course. From others he had asked for money to have a hospital constructed on Mount Carmel. All this had caused grave disquiet in the United States. Abdu'l-Baha had suffered silently, but did not include him in his retinue when he left for Europe. Farid's insinuations and accusations leveled against the person of Abdu'l-Baha at this period, in 1914, were nothing new in the history of violation. But his ingratitude was particularly obnoxious, because it was Abdu'l-Baha who had seen to his education from childhood and had kept him at universities in the United States. Farid's father, Mirza Asadullah, who traveled from the Holy Land to London to try to make him desist from his activities, not only failed in his mission, but eventually went over to his side. Sidney Sprague, the husband of his sister, also joined him, and it was not until 1937 that Sprague realized how grievously he had erred. Back once more in the circle of the faith, he made a trip to South America to teach and died soon after his return to the United States. But Dr. Farid trod the wilderness to the bitter end. War had come to Europe, and Turkey was about to commit herself to the cause of the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary. Although she had successive and decisive defeats in the Tripolitania and in the Balkans within the previous 3 years, her rulers, the Young Turks, and particularly the triumvirate of Anvar Pasha, Talata Pasha, and Jamal Pasha, forced her into another trial of strength, the outcome of which must have seemed hazardous and uncertain. By the end of October 1914, the die had been cast, and in the first week of November, Russia, Great Britain, and France found themselves obliged to declare war on Turkey, which was followed on November 14th by Turkey's declaration of holy war. That declaration was wrested from the Caliph Sultan Muhammad V by the reckless directors of the destinies of the Ottoman Empire. With Turkey in the war, the Near East was thrown into new turmoil, and Abdu'l-Baha was beset by fresh perils.